Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Shill Report, where journalism is reviewed and the stories of the week are expanded and explained. I'm your host, Ryan Ripley. Yeah, let's do take three. I don't even like this intro. Why don't we just start talking?
Just start. Say, hey, welcome. Welcome.
Hey,
to the
you
show.
know what? Let's just roll into it.
Okay.
Hey, welcome to this week's episode of the Shill Report. I'm Ryan Ripley, your dedicated host. Joining me, as always, is Chris Spangle, editor and owner and head honcho extraordinaire of We Are Libertarians.
To be an owner, I guess there'd have to be something of value, right?
Hey, we give value of information. We educate
Don't diss the
people.
product.
I know.
The product's lovely, Chris. And Joe Ruiz.
I don't work for free for nothing. Good to be here with you guys, as always.
It's all about the free swag, right?
Exactly.
There we go.
Much
The
swag
prestige, the fame.
You know, guys, it's another interesting week of news that we've queued up here, but I wanted to start with actually something from what Chris would say is the valueless We Are Libertarians news site. There's an article out there that I think we've got to give attention to, and I just wanted to start off with the We Are All Libertarians post by Lynn Swayze. I don't know if you guys have had a chance to read this yet, but what an excellent and very poignant view of what's wrong and what could be right of the entire libertarian movement. Have you guys had a chance to see this yet?
Oh, yeah.
Well, I edited it, so yes, I read it. And Lynn always does a very good job of bringing a unique perspective because she's kind of like a left-leaning libertarian, sort of like what Gina is. And she just, I don't know, it always brings something fresh to the site. So I was happy with that article as well.
Yeah, I got to say, after reading just her thoughts on what we can do as people to come together in the liberty movement, and that really at the root of all political belief really is the libertarian set of values. I got to admit, guys, I am a little Swayze crazy after this one. It really is a truly, it's a pretty awesome piece that I hope everyone goes out to the We Are Libertarians website and takes a look at. She really made some excellent points, and it's just a really refreshing view, especially in a community that can be a little argumentative at times. It can be a little divisive at times.
Shut up.
Huh?
He's got a fever. He's got a fever. And the only cure is more Swayze.
That's right. Swayze crazy.
Boo. So, I think she really touches on something that we've talked about on We Are Libertarians a lot. I think even this past week is defining libertarianism as that set of American values that we all agree on, and the issues are what divide us. Politics is what divide us. And if we can all just kind of come together and wrap around these principles and these values, then we'll be a much more harmonious society. So, yeah, she wrote a great piece.
And it's simple principles, right? It's don't hurt each other, don't violate anyone's life, liberty, and property, and basically, you know, keep yourself and be a good citizen. And if you can maintain that, you're going to hit 90% of the libertarian principles. It's really, I love the way she laid it out. Lynn, if you listen to this, excellent piece. And I hope you guys, you know, the listeners, you know, I hope you guys take the opportunity to hit the We Are Libertarians website and check this out. She really did a great job. You know, but speaking of divisive, I'm sure that we are going to be the millionth news source to talk about this topic, but I think it's important. It's the Rolling Stones cover that I don't understand what the big deal is. I went out and I picked it up for those of you watching, all two of you watching the video. Thank you. And here's the cover. Spangle's got it too. That's
Joe.
I don't get it, guys. I think it's a little odd that we're having a national discussion about a magazine that is known for controversial news reporting. If you remember that, you know, a few years back, Michael Hastings did an expose on General McCaskill that ended up in the resignation of that general.
General McChrystal.
And they've done stories like this in the past, and in this case, it's a story about a teenager who started off as a normal kid who's here in America being educated, and all of a sudden turns into a militant and trying to figure out how someone turned evil. And I think that's a good topic to dig into, and I don't understand the backlash here. What do you guys think?
I think it's ridiculous that people are making such a big deal out of something on the cover when it's obviously promoting a story within the actual magazine. You know, if it was Cosmopolitan magazine and it was Scarlett Johansson promoting 40 sex tricks that'll make your guy go gaga, then nobody would say anything about it, because that's obviously the product that they're pushing, and that's something that's relative to the article on the inside. And obviously they're talking about the bomber, so they have his picture on the cover, just like they did with Charles Manson in the 70s. And it's ridiculous that we should make more of a big deal out of it than it really is.
Rolling Stone is a cultural magazine. It's not, U.S. Weekly, Us Weekly, that People magazine, the National Enquirer. It's a cultural magazine, and they actually take a risk as a magazine by putting a non-musical figure on the front cover. You know, culture generally, we think of culture as music, movies. You know, that's kind of pop culture. We don't necessarily think of rhythms or milestones or, you know, various little nuances in society as part of our culture. And the article is dealing with a person that, you know, when you read the article, it's got 50-some people quoted. It's very long. It's probably 8 to 10 pages long, where they interview all of the people who knew Jahar, as, you know, his wrestling coach gave him that nickname. They interview the people that knew him, and they all say, you know, by and large, you know, he was a great kid. Here's one quote from the wrestling coach. "I knew this kid, and he was a good kid," said Jahar's former wrestling coach, sadly. And apparently he's also a monster. Now this coach, Payak, was very close to Jahar and was sort of a father figure to him in a lot of ways, and says that he was a 22-year-old kid that liked soccer, hip-hop, girls, was obsessed over The Walking Dead, Game of Thrones, and smoked copious amounts of weed. And if that doesn't sound like your average American 22-year-old kid, I don't know what does. But then he's also, you know, a monster. And he's part of our culture, and he turned on our culture, and they're explaining why. I just don't get the outrage over this, because it really comes down to trying to understand what's happening to, you know, maybe the Muslim population in America, because he had fully adopted our culture, and yet he will try to kill hundreds of people. So,
well, quite a bit of the outrage, I think, comes from, and this is the argument that I've seen all over the during the Facebook rage period here, is that it makes a celebrity out of a monster, or a celebrity out of a terrorist. And if you don't want to have a good cover for the Rolling Stone magazine, you should have the bombing victims on the cover, and instead of glorifying and making a celebrity out of a terrorist. And there's something to that, but at the same time, I do not believe for a second that a normal person is going to look at that cover and say, "Wow, I can be famous too. I'm going to go hurt people." Or "I'm going to go do something so devastating just so that I can get on the cover of a magazine." For someone to think like that, you already have to be a psychopath. I don't think this is going to create terrorists. It's not the glorification of a bomber. It's basically saying, look, as a society, we should pause, figure out why this happened, figure out why a normal kid who loves, hey, I love Game of Thrones, I love The Walking Dead.
You like smoking copious amounts of weed?
Hey. Spangle, you promised. But
I absolutely agree with what you're saying, though. If there are those of us who understand that violence and acts of violence are just not good, and we have no ambition to go out and commit such acts, and whether we see something on The Walking Dead or whether we see a cover of a magazine with a young boy who committed an act of terrorism, there's nothing that's going to make us want to go out and do that. Now, there are those people in society who that kind of thing appeals to them, and there's a possibility that they could go out and commit those acts. Are they more likely to do it because they see someone iconicized on the cover of a magazine in their mind? I don't think so. I think they would have done it anyway, because that's just the kind of personality they have. There's obviously something that's not right with them, and it's not. It doesn't have anything to do with the celebrity status. It's that they're warped.
Well, and interesting enough, I know that we typically take some pretty wide swipes at the Morning Joe, but on this Thursday, he actually had a conversation with Mika that was along these lines. Let's listen in real quick. This is from the Thursday Morning Joe. This is Joe Scarborough talking about how really examining this story was no different than when 9/11 occurred and when people bought the Koran to try to see where the evil came from. So let's give a listen to Joe's analysis, and we'll come back to this.
Horrible things happened to us. After 9/11, you remember everybody went out and bought the Koran. It was like the top-selling book in America for a month or so because we examine and then we look inward. And in that case, we were trying to figure out why they hated us, and we ended up realizing they hated us because we were evil. But that evil had a specific look. It was Osama bin Laden. It was foreign. It was exotic. What's so jarring about this cover is that this is a kid that's a good-looking kid, that's a popular kid, that looks like a lot of the readers of Rolling Stone, and the enemy is now within. The enemy now goes to our colleges. The enemy now looks like our next-door neighbor, and it becomes, Mika, a lot more troubling and a lot more disturbing. This is the tradition of Rolling Stone. The article is very in-depth, and if you've read Rolling Stone for more than a week or two, you're not shocked by this. I do understand.
So, guys, this is one of the few times where I would say, well done, MSNBC. Well done, Joe Scarborough. I think his analysis is spot on.
Sure. And I totally agree with it. I mean, there's two reasons behind the picture that I would argue for using this particular picture. One is it gives a human face, and we clearly, if you look at Facebook, have not learned the lessons of the propaganda from, 2003. Our enemies are human beings. Our enemies are still enemies, and this kid is an enemy. But he is a member of our society, and they're trying to humanize him a little bit, and that's what people are rejecting. They're rejecting any humanizing of Jahar What's-His-Face. So the other reason, if you look at the actual picture on the cover printed, it is a very low-quality photo compared to what Rolling Stone usually has. And it's not like they have a family photo album that they can flip through to find the best picture. They probably had a very limited amount of photos because of clearance, sizing, just things that would work. So they probably only had 1 to 3 choices of actual photos that they could use. And I just don't know how many people have experience in laying things out in publishing. But so those are sort of the two reasons that I think they actually use this on the cover. I mean, let's not be unsophisticated. We all know the context. We all know who this is. All know why he's on the cover. It's not a surprise. It's not. No one is going to be converted into thinking that this guy is a hero by looking at this photo
or a rock star.
And we should keep in mind too, guys, that this photo ran on the front page of the New York Times. This photo has already been circulated into the press. It was already used in this type of manner to sell newspapers, and I don't remember any outcry or controversy. Do you?
No, I mean, the Rolling Stone puts, Keith Richards on 2 issues ago and glorifies, the fact that he survived 1,400 heroin overdoses. I mean, it's just, and I'm not saying that heroin overdoses are, on par with a terrorist attack, but the fact is that this is a magazine cover. Let's all keep some context and perspective.
Sure. And before we move on to the next clip, I just want to point out that Mika Brzezinski always looks like she's not listening, like she's just waiting for her turn to talk. Have you guys ever noticed that?
I think she's just waiting to read the next line on the teleprompter. I don't give her enough. I don't give her enough credit for actually having an original thought.
Oh, she's so fun. She's like the Amanda Bynes of the media. I just love to talk about her.
You had to fit Amanda Bynes into this, didn't you?
That's what I do, brother.
How dare you, sir? All right, the next clip is the completely opposite view. Not surprisingly, it's from Fox News, and let's just give it a listen. I'm going to stop it at certain points, guys, and we will crack wise because it's really just ridiculous.
Republicans or Democrats or young people or old people, it's crossing through all different sects of people who find this very offensive.
Right. Sure. And remember, this is the same magazine, the Rolling Stone, that essentially, with that scorching profile back in 10 of Stanley McChrystal called The Runaway General, Rolling Stone effectively ended his career. And now what are they doing? You know, he's an American hero.
So first of all, I don't see, and this is a slight tangent, guys, a cheap shot at Michael Hastings' work is just inappropriate. And to call McChrystal an American hero after completely disrespecting the commander-in-chief, I know he's totally out of line here.
I would say that makes him an American hero. I don't know about you.
Well,
I mean, but
correct.
I understand your
I'm
point.
far from an Obama supporter, but when you have a chain of command and in the military for, you know what I'm saying.
I know.
When they act like that, and to say that Rolling Stones ended a career, no, the general and his staff ended their careers. That's, you know, that was good journalism by Michael Hastings, and Dosey's a tool for, and you know, he doesn't recognize good journalism and instead lashes out.
Steve Doocy and Gretchen Carlson and all of the Fox and Friends, I don't understand how anybody can watch that. I mean, they are just pushing, they're doing what everybody else is doing. I think most people are outraged by this cover because they're told to be outraged by the cover by people like Steve Doocy, who is sitting there thinking, okay, what's the angle on this? What kind of, you know, outrage can I manufacture today? Oh, look, this, you know, and it just is so disingenuous. And can I ask you guys a question? When was the last time you've been legitimately outraged? It seems like everybody's always outraged all the time, but I can't really tell you the last time any time I was really outraged by.
Well, there's so much that is out there almost on a daily basis that is deserving of scrutiny and ridicule. And how can you become desensitized to things that you should be outraged about after a certain period of time? And so, you know, they make up some things that I wouldn't even get this upset about. That's what they're doing in this clip here. But I think people should be more upset at this kind of journalism.
Chris, the last time I was truly outraged was the season finale, the series finale of The Sopranos. I mean, they fade to black. What?
I loved it. It made you feel what Tony Soprano felt all of the time. Is this going to be my loved one, my daughter, or is this going to be someone that will murder me, or will this be federal agents? It was just, it made you feel what Tony Soprano felt.
But ever since then, I've been pretty level, so I don't...
Yeah, I mean, it just... Anytime I hear in TV news a bombshell has taken place or an outrage has been sparked, I know to ignore it.
Right. And in all seriousness, I think I truly felt some outrage when the Snowden story first broke. Yeah. I really was upset. Just the realization of how big the spying game has gotten really set me off, and I think I had to go have a few minutes of quiet time before I could be back around my family. But other than that, you're right. It's just we're so saturated, and it's almost like it's noise pollution that's always all around us. It's all these signals, but or it's all this noise, but very few signals, and it's almost like we're so overloaded with this nonsense that you can't get outraged because you don't even have the time to build up to that emotion because there's just something in the next news cycle the next day that, all right, now I got to get mad about this, and by the end of the week you're just exhausted.
And I think that's one of the reasons we started this podcast. It's like the stuff that is truly outrageous. You know, things that, you know, like NSA spying or, you know, prostitution rings at your local massage parlor where it's the sex trade and we have slaves living amongst us. Those are things that should truly outrage us. Those are things that should get coverage to motivate people to change these things, but they don't ever get covered. You know, what gets covered is these faux outrageous things like we need to devote 23 hours of our day to Rolling Stone magazine and George Zimmerman and our fake race wars, which we'll devote time to next. I mean,
Chris, I think it's scary these days for a journalist to jump into a truly dirty story. You know, what happens if they look into the sex slave trade in Sri Lanka and find out that, you know, U.S. aid somehow helped that type of activity take place and that there is some CIA angle to it? Or what happens if they have to break that kind of story and all of a sudden they're ostracized? I think it is incredibly dangerous these days to go down that rabbit hole, as people like Edward Snowden and some others have proven that you don't want to even accidentally end up on the wrong side of the government.
Michael Hastings is the perfect example. I think anybody who looks into just the cursory facts from afar as to Michael Hastings' death and the days leading up to it,
Chris, can we just call it the
suspicious.
Michael Hastings murder? I have no doubt in my mind that
it's
that
so
he was
suspicious.
He was murdered.
And I'm not saying that it was the government. I'm just saying that there is something truly suspicious about the death of Michael Hastings that was reported this week, that he was cremated without family permission. I mean, the family had no say in what happened to his body. They cremated it. And I just, I think in probably 2 to 4 months, we're going to see a long-form piece from Rolling Stone, The Atlantic, New Yorker, outlining the case for a murder, essentially, for Michael Hastings, who if you go to Rolling Stone and you look at his author list of stories that he wrote for Rolling Stone, it is truly, if you're in the government, it's subversive stuff. It is.
Well, and apparently just prior to that car accident, or however, I'm using air quotes, so that's really horrible podcasting on my part, but apparently he had sent a story to his attorney, and that there is something breaking that could possibly come out. It'll be interesting to see if that story ever sees the light of day.
Oh, I hope so. I mean, I wondered if that was the case. I mean, you write this story, you're worried about it, and you don't send it to somebody?
Yeah. We're gonna take a quick peek back into this Fox piece just because it is kind of fun, and then we'll get away from this topic.
Here he is happy. Here he is today, looking at the death penalty.
They do
that is the right thing. That is a cover shot. That is not something to lure people in. The one they used makes it seem like a sexy thing to go do that, and there's a lot of impressionable 18-year-olds who think that's their guy.
And their defense is that they're trying to write more newsy kind of articles, not just do music stories, and that they also.
I love that little laugh from Gretchen. What does she know about newsy stories? I don't think she's ever covered a true piece of news. I mean, she's good at throwing gasoline on the fire of very impressionable fools, but does she actually report the news, guys?
Now she's acting like Rolling Stone is trying to infiltrate on, they're cramping her style or something. It's just kind of a ridiculous thought. I think what they're talking about here with this picture, and this is what kind of humors me, is that the kid's kind of a good-looking kid. Despite what he did, he's kind of a handsome guy or whatever, and I think that's what's really problematic. If the kid looked like the Toxic Avenger or something, and they put his mugshot there on the cover of Rolling Stone, do you think this would have been as big of an issue, or are they worried that his level of attractiveness is going to somehow add to this hysteria that they think is forming, where people are going to commit violent acts because they thought somebody looked nice on the cover of a magazine?
Critics act like Rolling Stone were responsible for his personal style. It's not their fault that he wore his hair like Jim Morrison. It just is insane to me. And the way that they frame it is through it's all outrageous. We should put the cover of him with the security camera video on the cover. Like, if you're the editor of a magazine and it's not just about selling magazines, that's part of it, but it's also you're taking a risk by putting this person. That there's going to be outrage. I don't know if they knew that there would be this level of outrage. I don't think they thought they'd get pulled from CVS and Walgreens, but you are taking a risk by not putting pop culture on the cover. You're putting, Muslim.
Chris, when's the last time you bought an issue of Rolling Stone?
Last month. I get it on the iPad.
You have a hard copy in your home. When's the last time you went out and bought a hard copy of that magazine?
I haven't bought a hard copy probably in 6 months, but
this is the first one I've bought in probably 2 years. So whoever is the editor of Rolling Stone, kudos to them. They took a risk. Every news outlet is talking about their magazine. Rolling Stone is almost becoming relevant again. With great risk comes great reward, and I think they nailed it. And it's a wonderful story. It is a story of how, like we said, a normal teenager or a supposedly normal teenager went from a person with potential to be a positive member of society into a horrible monster who wrecked the lives of countless people. It's a story we should understand. This is far more important than anything else on TV. It can educate us. It can help us identify people that could be on this horrible path. I mean, there's so many upside benefits to this kind of story that this kind of fake outrage and throwing gasoline on the fire of fools is just, it's unconscionable.
And can I say, as we bid farewell to Gretchen Carlson before we move on to the next topic, she has always struck me as the type of woman at your kid's soccer game that you can't stand. And I don't know why you'd want to put that type of person on your air, that judgmental, stupid type of woman that at the kid's soccer game that you just can't stand, and Steve is her, stupid, image-obsessed husband, and it just... I don't know how anybody can watch that crap. Killmeat has half a brain cell to rub together. Ducey and Gretchen are just, they look good while they read.
Right, and so we've been a little hard on the media in this area, and definitely rightly so. What was interesting, though, some people that I did not expect to have a lash out effect towards the media was Mark O'Mara, who, as we all know, is still, I believe, George Zimmerman's attorney. At the end of the trial, after the verdict came out, he and his co-counsel really stuck it to the media in some very poignant comments. So let's listen to those real quick, and then I think there's going to be an interesting discussion after this one, because it really is almost an indictment of the mainstream media.
Comes from a jury, and that jury has rendered its verdict. We're still watching and listening. This is Mark O'Mara. Let's listen in.
For 45 seconds, and then a man who believes in the system, whose dad was a judge, who maybe wanted to be a cop or a prosecutor, then gets a system. Two systems went against George Zimmerman that he can't understand. You guys, the media, he was like a patient in an operating table where mad scientists were committing experiments on him, and he had no anesthesia. He didn't know why he was turned into this monster, but quite honestly, you guys had a lot to do with it. You just did, because you took a story that was fed to you, and you ran with it, and you ran right over him. And that was horrid to him. Then he comes into a system that he trusts. Let's not forget, 6 voluntary statements, voluntary surrender. And he believes in a system that he really wanted to be part of, right? And then he gets prosecutors that charge him with a crime they could never, ever prove. It's not like they didn't lose evidence along the way, right? So I don't think anyone would argue with me in this room that they had evidence of second-degree murder. This in-your-heart kind of stuff, that's not what we're supposed to do, and it's not what they're supposed to do. So...
Was that Joe?
I had to do that.
Joe,
I just had to.
All right, Joe, explain the applause. Let's hear it.
Well, he said exactly what we've been saying between here and on We Are Libertarians for months now, which is, or however long it's been. Why is this such a big story? Why is this a national story? Why is this something that's being discussed? And he waited till the end, I guess, which was probably smart, but he called out the media for how they were blowing this thing up, and I applaud him again for that.
What's really interesting is, following those comments, there's been a few news reports that have come out, one of them from, I think, McClatchy's, that the FBI tried to find a racial angle to this story. They went and they profiled George Zimmerman. They talked to his friends. They talked to his family. They looked at his work in the community. And the FBI has come back and said, there is not a racial motive in this case. We cannot find evidence of racism. And that essentially the story that the mainstream media has been running with is that, Zimmerman is a white Latino male who was racist against African American teenagers, just didn't hold water. That's an interesting development of the story. It's also interesting, just to buy the kind of story that the mainstream media was selling, you have to first believe that Zimmerman was a racist, which the FBI could not prove. You also have to believe that 6 jurors selected by the defense and prosecution to listen to this case were racist as well. And as you add these factors in, it just seems like it's such a stretch for this story to ever hold true, and it's just amazing that it took this much time for someone to finally just come out and stick it right back in the mainstream media's eye.
Zimmerman took an African-American female to the prom. Zimmerman had worked at several charities and volunteered at several charities where he mentored young black males. I mean, that doesn't strike me as the type of person who is racist towards a group. I mean, there were certainly in the 911 call that wasn't, there was a few things that weren't great, and I wouldn't deny that he probably went to question Trayvon and followed Trayvon because of the color of his skin and what he was wearing, But the central problem with this entire story is that we have taken, as Mark O'Mara said, we've taken tragedy and turned it into a travesty. We have drawn this out and painted this guy as the worst racist in America when he did some foolish things, Trayvon did some foolish things, and a horrific death occurred. And it has now spun into this national conversation on race, fueled largely by, the Justice Department sent down people right after the murder to start pushing the storyline that there was a racial aspect to this. And then you've got, I watched Jesse Jackson on Jake Tapper yesterday, and I should not have done it. I shouldn't have done it, guys. He's, Florida is an apartheid state. We're not going to let this go until the Justice Department files a 1983 civil action against him. And it's just like, all of Florida is racist, according to Jesse Jackson. And then we're not even going to get into Melissa Harris Perry on MSNBC.
Oh, gosh.
Well, the problem, guys, and this is when Mark O'Mara is talking about the story that the media ran with, if you remember the initial narrative that the media tried to lay out, it started with pictures of a 12-year-old Trayvon Martin and a 275-pound George Zimmerman, who a menacing kind of figure. Really, Trayvon Martin was 17 at the time, and George Zimmerman was 100 pounds lighter. I mean, it wasn't this skewed, very large, dangerous man kills child. It was two essentially adults, like Chris said, who made horrible mistakes throughout this entire encounter, and it ended in a tragic death. That, unfortunately, that was never the narrative of the media. It was always a racist monster brutalizes young child, and it just did not pan out.
How can, and it always happens in these cases, how can George Zimmerman defend himself? He's in the middle of a trial. He can't come out into the media and defend himself and present his side of the story. And Trayvon could, and that's, there's not a lot of fair and balanced with these types of stories. And I think there is a concerted push by maybe a certain group of publicists or a certain group of media outlets that look for the next Casey Anthony, the next Jodi Arias. Zimmerman we knew was going to be this kind of monster because they love to seize on these trials and these, the missing girl, the Natalie Holloways, because that's what we love to watch. We give them ratings. And I'm a Newsroom fan, and if you watch the Casey Anthony episode where they're, talking about how they've lost half their viewers because they're trying to do political news instead of Casey Anthony, that happens. And it's our fault because of the media that we choose to consume.
All right, moving on. There was a clip here that I also wanted to show you guys on this. It was an interesting and truly honest moment on Fox News where Bob Beckel finally had enough of his The Five co-hosts, and he called out Fox News for actually profiteering on this topic as well. It was a nice, honest moment. I think we ought to highlight these when they happen, and so here we go.
Racism, Al wouldn't have a job.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Well, so,
and there is racism, so that's why he gets to stand up in front of the NAACP. That's why he gets to put a show that no one's watching on another network, and that's why he gets a girlfriend that will show you at the end of the show like that. But if that goes away, what is Al Sharpton going to tell us if race relations in America were 100% perfect?
Well, that's
what
his business is. I mean,
that's my point.
But the other thing about Bill O'Reilly saying, he's talking about profit. What do you think we do?
What do you mean?
What do you think this network, any other network does. We're not profiting on
We're not profiting.
How are we profiting on it? We're covering the news.
Here.
Bob, this is a news network. We report the news.
I know,
This is
and it's big news, and it gets good ratings, and so everybody's making a profit. So what's the big deal?
Oh my
No,
goodness.
I think we're doing it because people are talking about it. I think it's because it's big news. I don't think we're setting the table.
Yeah, but we're
for everyone
journalists.
to talk about it.
We're supposed to cover the news.
Can I just make a point here?
journalist.
Here's how
Okay,
this thing went down.
the rest of
There are 1,000 of these crimes like this, or not. It actually wasn't even a crime. There are 1,000 of these issues that go on every.
Such indignation that they are not part of the media. I think it's a good admission on Fox News' part that they truly are not members of the media. They're infotainment, and I applaud Bob Beckel for pointing out that Fox News is profiteering, and I think it's great that the rest of them all agree that the media did this and that they were just a victim of it. They finally admit they are not a media source. What do you guys think?
But you've got the one woman who's saying that we're journalists and we're supposed to report the news, and I think in her mind they are part of the media. And I think if you were to ask Fox News, they would generally say that they are part of the media as well. But what they're trying to do here is draw a distinction between them and the news outlets who they claim push more of a liberal agenda. And this is a problem because it's all problematic at the end of the day. So yeah, I mean, from our perspective, sure, they're infotainment. They're not journalists. This is not real news, and this is a distraction from the things that are really going on. But at the end of the day, they picked up the story because that's what acquired the ratings, just like the rest of the news outlets that they're calling out right here. And I'm glad that Bob Beckel was actually honest about it. He said, this is what's profitable, and this is why we're running the story, and this is why we're talking about it.
Yeah, I have said that forever, and we talked about it a little bit about this on this week's We Are Libertarians, episode 52. You know, there's a distinction between actual reporting and news and giving facts and commentary. And commentary is when you take facts and then you give your opinion on them. And somehow, because this is what gets ratings, we have confused opinion-based programming with news. And you know, we would do better if we had more media outlets that, you know, like I love Jake Tapper and I love Brett Hume's show, Special Report with Brett Baer. I'm sorry, Brett. Didn't mean to do that. But I really...
That's all right, Chris. He's not listening.
You watch Brett Baer's program, and it is reporting where they are giving facts. Now, you could argue that the facts may be skewed one way or the other. The editorial process of what gets on and what doesn't get on skews one direction. That's why you've got to watch, you know, Aaron Burnett to balance it out the other way or whatever. I mean, so it's that what the Five does is not news. It does not inform you. It only informs you of that person's opinion. And this is exceptionally prevalent on the right. The right confuses opinion as information that can be used at the voting booth. They're giving you an opinion. They're telling you what the opinion is, and you are taking that as if it is a fact. Well, no, you're just supposed to take their opinion and evaluate it based on the facts that you learned earlier. You've got to eat your vegetables so you can weed out the crap. So, I know, it's terrible. You can't just live on Hershey bars.
Well, you like. Can. Come on, Spangle. That's the Hershey diet.
Well, I am alive and well, so.
No, guys, it's agenda-based journalism, and this is what Fox and MSNBC typically. You know, this is their MO, and for them to be outraged that Bob Beckel would dare call them out for following a media trend and for trying to make money just like everyone else is just ridiculous.
This is the best thing I've seen come out of the Five in a long time, and it was only one of the Five, but still.
Hey, I mean, I listen to Glenn Beck because I want to be informed as to what Glenn Beck's opinion is. Mm-hmm. I don't confuse the fact that what Glenn Beck is saying is going to be right, you know, and it's up to me to judge what Glenn Beck's information is. And that is a very big distinction that we've totally lost because we want to make caricatures out of everything. I think we have so much information in this day and age that you have to make caricatures of everything, and that helps you just weed out everything. And it just... That's why if you're watching television news, by and large, you're having your intelligence insulted.
Let's shift gears into a story that has been completely underexploited, and that is the Bradley Manning trial. There's been some very troubling developments in this trial. They've gone largely unreported. Again, we are forced to rely on The Guardian, which is, again, a foreign newspaper, to report on a United States trial that I don't think anyone in the government or anyone in the mainstream media really wants us to pay attention to. But the two developments that have taken place here, first of all, the court or the military tribunal, I believe is what it's called, they've decided that leaking to an outlet such as WikiLeaks is equivalent to giving information to the New York Times. So they've tied a news outlet to more of a non-traditional news outlet, and they've tied those together as being equivalent. The second thing they've done is they've kept the aided the enemy charge against Bradley Manning. And so this actually could have a pretty negative effect on the media and their ability to report on their governments. If this charge holds up, it essentially could criminalize a journalist for potentially reporting on news that's leaked to them. Guys, this goes against the foundation of a free press by the Constitution. This could potentially take away the ability of a free press to accurately report on the wrongdoings of our government. This is fundamental to our freedom, and this has really largely gone underreported. Am I just blowing this out of proportion, or is this really something we should be looking at?
I think it's heading our way. I mean, they just in the last 2 weeks signed over. They passed into law that Voice of America can now broadcast inside America. Voice of America is the State Department's official media outlet that goes into it's basically America's version of Russia Today or Al Jazeera to present American culture and the American way of life and the American point of view in countries like North Korea, Iran, over the radio, over the television waves, and they now are able to broadcast here in America. Lyndon B. Johnson at one point said, if I can't get the ABC, CBS, and NBC to cooperate on the Vietnam War, I've got my own media outlet. So, the fact that is being lifted, and then you've got the crackdown, the criminalizing of journalism, real journalism, is troubling. And I think it's a trend that is very dangerous unless we pull our heads out of the sand.
I agree.
Well, this is the emergence of state-run media, correct? And this is initially they're going to come down on whistleblowers as hard as they possibly can. We know that Bradley Manning was detained for quite a long time without due process, without a trial. He was also tortured while he was in that kind of limbo situation where he was a prisoner yet not fully charged and processed. The message is clear, even with the Edward Snowden case, that whistleblowers are going to be punished, and we've even seen signs from the AP scandal, the Fox News scandal, that journalists, in the case of the Fox journalist who was charged as a co-conspirator in that situation, that even journalists are being considered for prosecution as well. How long does it take before it's just all propaganda machines because a journalist is afraid of going to prison? And people really should be thinking about what the effect of a lack of investigative journalism will have on this country and what state-run media will actually look like. Some have argued that what we have today is the equivalent. I think that's some hyperbole. That's definitely an exaggeration.
Hyperbole.
Hyperbole.
I think that's hyperbole. I was listening to. I think
it is some excessive bullying.
I was listening to the Jamie Dupree podcast. Jamie, don't let the places that he appears fools you. He's the congressional correspondent for Cox Media, and he appears on Sean Hannity and the Herman Cain show every day, and he had an interesting comment, this week, where I think Herman Cain asked him about the comments about we're going to boycott the Russian Olympics if we don't turn over Snowden, and he said, I think that this story is starting to really develop. The White House sent out a message to all the media that we really need the media to turn up the pressure on Russia and start reporting this story on how we're going to do this if the Russians don't do this. And it was all based on Snowden. And I don't think I've ever heard it that blatant before. You kind of assume that, Jay Carney sends out a press release or a little email, a personal email to reporters and says, hey, here's the angle. And the reporters go along with it. And the thought that the White House would say, hey, start putting pressure on the Russians by creating this story and making this a big deal is pretty stunning. And I don't think, it was such a throwaway line for Dupree. He wasn't making an issue of it. It just was like, this happens all the time. I thought that was stunning. And we already have state-run media. It's just if you look at that story and say, okay, well, here you go.
Well, why? From one perspective, yes, it's stunning, but from another, the U.S. government was more than willing to pressure European nations to ground a plane that potentially had Edward Snowden aboard. As a country, we have no interest in the sovereignty of other nations. We have no interest in international law. We press ourselves on to nations for our own benefit, and if they don't want to play ball, they get sanctions, they get lack of foreign aid, they get punishment, and we use those tools to manipulate and control. It shouldn't be surprising that the media is manipulated and controlled just as much as sovereign nations are worldwide, and that there is an effort to at least skew the message in order to get it away from problematic areas for the administration. Keep in mind, while we're arguing over Rolling Stone covers, while we're arguing over the Zimmerman trial and other such nonsense, we still have a major problem within the IRS. We still have a major problem in the NSA. We now know that they're doing triple jump searches so that if a person if a person talks to a terrorist, 3 people separated from them, 3 levels separated, could still have information collected about them.
So let's say, for a moment, let's explain that, because this was admitted under a congressional testimony, which means a lot when the NSA is testifying. So let's say Ryan Ripley's a terrorist, and Ryan Ripley talks to Joe Ruiz. Well, then the NSA gives itself permission to go on Joe's Facebook and start monitoring every one of Joe's Facebook friends. Well, Chris Spangle is also associated with these two, so he's the second step. Well, Chris Spangle has almost 5,000 Facebook friends, so then we're going to branch out into his, and then...
that was a humble brag, Chris. Come on.
Chris has a friend named Maya, and we better investigate that person. And then it goes on and on and on. So it's just bunk that they're only investigating terrorists. But it's not a humble brag. It's a legitimate number. It's what I have. And that opens the door to one heck of a pyramid spying scheme.
It completely opens the door to anyone being spied on or targeted, and it completely diffuses any comment that the Senate Intelligence Committee, the oversight for these activities, they've tried to downplay this, saying, no, innocent Americans aren't being targeted or tracked. And in fact, based on these new revelations, every one of those senators, including our senator, Dan Coates, should have to come back and revise their statements and say, well, I guess it looks like, actually we can spy on you if you're 3 people removed from a potential terrorist that we want to track, and so far they've not done that. But in any case, state-run media will make it much harder for us to know these truths. It will make it much harder for people like Edward Snowden and Bradley Manning to leak documents that tell us the truth about our government, and it's something that the people should be and by the people I mean everyone listening and the entire country, it's something that we should all be concerned about, because once we lose that ability to essentially audit and investigate our government, it's no longer a democracy, guys. That's gone.
Yeah, we have media that is not forced to report certain things. They're persuaded, and the government has leverage by, it's hanging access to certain people and certain information over their head. So it's not a state-run media in the classic sense where, they're on the government payroll. It's persuasion and leverage and manipulation as opposed to force. But that could happen if we're not vigilant, and it could happen if we don't choose the right news as consumers. Stop filling
I see
the trash.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No problem. I see it as no different than the United States providing foreign aid to a starving nation and yet expecting them to behave in a certain way or else that aid will be cut off. And so if you're a member of the press, you need access to power. And if the power decides that you lose your access, you're out of a job. And so, Chris, you're 100% spot on. It's an indirect control, but it's still very oppressive in some cases.
I don't think that necessarily takes away from the influence that the viewers and the listeners of these various news outlets actually have. And I think that if we were more demanding of truth and of facts, that there wouldn't be as many efforts to get away from what actual journalism is supposed to be. And I think that people, and it's like we were talking about earlier, where the news has become more opinion-based. And so every, whether it be Fox News, MSNBC, CNN, they have their own sort of corner of the bias pool where they hang out and they give their perspective on the news and on the topics of the day from that little spot in the pool. And so in order to really hear every side of the story, you have to watch and listen to all these various outlets within the media, and you have to then put together all of those opinions and try and get through the clutter and be a critical thinker. And the problem with what's going on right now is that people are making an active decision to not be a critical thinker. They're saying that, well, I agree more with the opinions of those on Fox News, or I agree more with the opinions of those that are being portrayed from MSNBC. And so I'm going to choose to only commit my time to watching those opinions and listening to those opinions. And by the end of the day, no one is actually making a decision to actively think critically. And so when that happens, the government or whoever is actually strong-arming these outlets or these organizations can say, you know what, this is the way people are moving. People are acting out of convenience. They're not actually thinking about these issues. And so we can, according to our agenda and the things that we are trying to accomplish on our level, start to move things in our direction. That's how a state-run media, a non-hyperbolic state-run media actually comes into play and actually forms. It's when people stop making an active and conscious decision to think critically.
Well, and the scary part, guys, is if you look at the current ratings for these news outlets, Fox News dominates the ratings charts. There's a few shows on CNN that make it in, and then it's The Daily Show. Amazingly, so The Daily Show is now considered a news outlet. I think it's a funny show, but you have Fox News, CNN, The Daily Show, and then I think it's CBS News, and at the very bottom is MSNBC. And so you see that a large percentage of the nation is either going to the very right-leaning Fox News, the pretty moderate overall shows on CNN, or they're going to Comedy Central, which is pretty telling and probably explains a lot of why the current electorate and the current citizenry is so uninformed.
Oh, I think The Daily Show is a comedy show, and it's not ridiculous. And if you watch Fox and Friends, it's ridiculous. It's insulting to your intelligence.
Yeah, it's kind of like Good Morning America meets Focus on the Family. And that's not to say that we are libertarians are guilty of the same thing, because we have our own perspective that we offer. And same here on the show report. We have an objective, but we're still bringing it from an opinionated, more commentary-based side. And it really is up to the listener to say, here's the libertarian perspective on this. Let me go find out what the liberal perspective and the conservative perspective and the communist perspective or whatever else they're going to gather. Put all of the pieces into the puzzle and find out which picture they agree with the most, and that's where people are being lazy. That's what I'm talking about.
Hey, I'm not a commie.
Yeah, we don't present ourselves with flashing chyrons that we're we don't have reporters, and it's we don't present ourselves as a credible news source. We present ourselves and we tell you, here's our opinion, and you judge for yourselves. I mean, it's
sure.
It is, and I would say, I think you made a good point, and we ought to throw this in there. Most newspapers used to have an ombudsman, and that ombudsman was not, they didn't have a boss, but they were paid by the paper to help make corrections. They were the advocate for the readers. So if there was a problem with the story or a fact was wrong, then they would send this person an email, and they would go to the newsroom, and they'd get it fixed. And a lot of newspapers just can't afford to have that anymore. So a lot of times people will just email the reporter and the editors directly. Joe, you work at a news station. I've worked at a news station. And half the time when you got correction emails or trying to complete a case, it was bat-ass crazy. So, correct people, but also do it in a way that is, like, honestly questioning, like, hey, can you explain this a little bit more, as opposed to, you're such a liberal idiot.
What, that doesn't work?
No, it doesn't.
By the way, you brought up Herman Cain, and this is just a little off topic, but I just want to make one of my notoriously bad jokes. I think it's funny.
Listeners at this point that any jokes made by Joe Ruiz do not necessarily reflect the humor of Ryan Ripley or Chris Spangle. Go ahead.
Fair enough. No, I'll own my bad sense of humor, but I just think it's funny that this once prominent presidential candidate who was considered the front runner in the race last go around is now just a radio host. And I'm not saying that he doesn't have a voice there, but I work in the radio business, so I could only hear the conversations that are going on in that kind of arena. Like, Herman, next Saturday we got a remote at the local farmers market. You're gonna go out there and do your show there? Good. I could talk about apples and oranges. How much is a bushel? $9.99.
Oh, God. He starts every show with, we're going to take our country back. And it's like, take the country back from what?
Poor Herman.
All right.
So let's wrap this up with, if just one listener out there ever messaged us or sent us an email and said, guys, throughout the craziness of the Shill report, you convinced me that, maybe I should take a look at something other than Fox News or something other than CNN, or that maybe I should do a little more reading about each story, I would be incredibly pleased. I think that's truly our goal, that we want to tell people that, look, if you're watching just these sources, like Chris said, you're not eating your vegetables, you're just going straight to dessert. There's more to these stories than what these news outlets are willing to tell you, and if just one person would come out and say, look, you guys really convinced me to dig a little deeper into Bradley Manning or into the Michael Hastings issue or all of those other stories that we bring up, I think it would be very satisfying, at least for me.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely.
So speaking of state-run media and being worried about power, Jay Carney, he's our favorite. He is like the master of ceremonies for the Shill factory, right? He is the one that pumps the news out, and he's largely responsible for what comes out of the White House. He ran into a 16-year-old buzzsaw of an intern that really put him on the spot and kind of shook him a little bit. Let's listen to this, and then we'll do a little commentary.
Finger with the Daily Caller. Because of the death threats being received by George Zimmerman and his parents, is the president going to take any action for their security, or are they on their own?
Well, I think I would refer you to Florida authorities. I'm not aware of that story, but the president has called for, echoing the statements of Trayvon Martin's family, for calm reflection in the wake of the verdict. And that continues to be his position. He certainly would oppose any violence of any kind.
So they're on their own.
You can editorialize all you want, and I have no doubt that you will, but that is a ridiculous statement.
So that was 16-year-old intern Gabe Finger. He is working with the Daily Caller right now. it was a simple question about the security of George Zimmerman and whether or not the president had any interest in that. And wow, did that just turn into a train wreck for Jay Carney?
You think so?
Yeah, I'm. Go ahead, Joe, because we may end up agreeing on this one.
I actually think that was the right thing for him to do. One, because the kid's question was based on the premises that the federal government should actually be doing something in regards to Zimmerman. I think they've done more than enough and actually too much. And I think while it is his job to sidestep pretty much every question, or at least that's what he seems to do, referring him to the Florida authorities was actually the right call to make on this one. And not only that, but we spend so much time, hearing what they've plotted and what they've put out for us to hear after scrutinizing it and making sure that the facts that are coming out are not going to offend anybody or whatever and that's what Jay Carney's essential job is. But with this, we were actually given a shred of insight into what Jay Carney actually thinks. And I think that's the most honesty and the most transparency that we've seen come from these guys in quite a while. And so, one, the kid's question, I don't think that it warranted any more of a response. And two, Jay Carney did the right thing by referring them to the Florida authorities. Three, I like that we got to see a little bit of his opinion towards this.
I think that I don't care that they sent an intern. It's kind of a cool thing. Having had multiple interns over my various jobs, you do want to give them an experience that they're going to look back and say, that was really cool when I got to do that. So, asking a harmless question at a White House briefing that nobody pays attention to, I'm not so outraged that they did that. I thought Carney's response that it was a ridiculous follow-up, he's kind of right. It is ridiculous. I mean, the question wasn't bad. The follow-up was stupid, but that's what you get with an inexperienced 16-year-old reporter. You're thick.
Welcome to journalism.
Right. I mean, it's, they... the Daily Caller guys, Tucker Carlson and Neil, I'm going to mess up his last name, put out a statement saying his question wasn't half as ridiculous as most of the questions that are asked there every day. And I listened to the press briefings, when the Lindsey Graham thing where he said that we should boycott the Olympics, it's like Carney covered it. He said he wasn't going to say anything, and then he got asked that same question 40 more times. And Jay Carney just finally said, "Can you guys ask me different questions, or otherwise, can we just be done?" It's, So Carney it is ridiculous. What do you want the Secret Service to go down and protect George Zimmerman? What do you want, riots on the White House lawn?
Well, there is some decent motivation to that question, though. The narrative from the White House has been all about on the Trayvon Martin side of the fence, and what I poorly articulated yesterday on the Gary Snyder show, and what I hope to do a little better today, is that George Zimmerman is not guilty of a crime, and yet still the backlash is completely against him. And if you think about the circumstances under which this scenario unfolded, Trayvon Martin put George Zimmerman in a situation where he feared for his life, which means, and a jury agreed with that. And so Zimmerman was actually either being assaulted or was having a crime committed against him. And so to ask for the White House to say, now wait a minute, you've sided completely on the side of Trayvon Martin. Your narrative is all about remembering Trayvon. Well, wait, why aren't we talking about the gentleman who actually didn't commit the crime? And if you're looking at it from that point of view, maybe the question is reasonable. I agree that Jay Carney deflected it correctly, but that kind of questioning should be happening in that press gaggle, and it simply isn't.
We don't know what happened with Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman. We can't convict somebody when we don't know. Both sides laid it out.
But we can't praise either side either.
Right.
And that's the problem. We can't highlight, and we can't promote, and we can't put these people up on a pedestal when we truly don't know what went down. And that's
what we can do.
What the president can do is step up in front of the nation and say, we are one people. This is a tragedy that we all need to together heal from, and let's stop the divisiveness. And instead, he does the exact opposite and continues the race narrative in front of the American people and continues that divisive nature. And if those kind of questions stop that kind of divisive narrative, I think that 16-year-old intern could have some value here.
I'm just going to be honest. I listened to Obama's speech yesterday, and I thought it was very personal. I thought it was one of the few times that I have actually felt a connection in some way to Barack Obama. Like, I felt like he was telling me the truth as opposed to just spinning me. And I felt that his comments yesterday were heartfelt and serious, and he was relaying things that happened to him in his own life and expressed the view of what it's like to be a black man in America. And, I really felt like, okay, I can see your point of view and I understand it, as opposed to, Baba, shut up, rabble. I know I'm going to get killed.
I think his comments were very
that.
sincere, but I don't understand why they have to come on the heels of a tragedy like this. If we need to have a national discussion on race, let's tee that up in a positive light, and let's have that be based on a constructive conversation. Instead, the approach that the president took, I believe, could be spun into a negativity towards Zimmerman, and that would be unfortunate.
Right.
I think it's just so touchy of a subject because of what it's been hyped up to and what it's been made out to be. And what the president should be doing, if he has his own opinion or if he feels some sort of personal connection to the circumstances, that's one thing. I think that he should keep them to himself. I think that he has a lot of federal business that needs to be managed, and a lot of things that have been mismanaged and things that we could be talking about. And instead of holding a press conference to discuss something like that, I get that that's what he's trying to be a leader, and that's what his definition of being a leader is. But let's do something to move us away from our massive debt. Let's continue to talk with Congress and try and find solutions. And let's try and continue to talk about things that are going to get us out of our numerous affairs overseas. Like, those are the things that really he needs to be focusing his time on. And while everybody in the nation is having this conversation, he needs to spend his time doing his job and not talking about this.
Guys, I'm more cynical, I guess. If the president's allowed, or if he's not allowed, but if he's able to talk about Trayvon Martin, he doesn't have to talk about the IRS. He doesn't have to talk about the NSA. He doesn't have to talk about his total failure in bringing Snowden home. He doesn't have to talk about all of these boondoggles that are plaguing his second term. And I agree, Joe. Let's move on. Let's get back to the meat and potatoes of running the country, and let's hopefully have a valuable race discussion, if it's warranted, at a later time that's brought up in a more positive light.
I'd argue that he didn't want to talk about this because every time he mentions race, especially black politics over any other racial politics, he gets blowback for it. And he was getting a lot of criticism saying, you're the moral leader of the black community, and, you're far more respectable than Jesse Jackson, for instance, and you're not going to come out and make a statement about the most significant event in, this community for a while. You're just not going to say a thing after you said something last year. You've got to come out and lead morally, and that was... the Democratic Party is made up of various coalitions that come together to vote together based on their interest. And you saw this when he got elected the first time, and he didn't make a Hispanic a member of his cabinet, and so he had to appoint the first Hispanic judge just to kind of make the coalition groups that make up that community happy. Because people like La Raza were very, very upset that he didn't reward that community with a position. That's just the way that the Democratic Party operates. And in the grand scheme of things, you can walk and chew gum at the same time. You can fix the debt while you're making a 20-minute statement. It's a big operation. So
obviously not.
Yeah. Good point.
And so you might be right. He may not have wanted to talk about it, and he might have felt obligation to some sort of interest groups or something. But I think he could have made the choice because while he is the president, he is his own man. He could have made the choice to go about his business and not actually share that, not actually talk about that, and not continue the conversation. That's Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson. That narrative is their shtick. Let them handle that kind of stuff, and let whoever opposed them on the other side handle that kind of stuff. We don't need the president to do that.
I would say that having watched his statements, he gave me more context into the other side of the coin.
Do you feel like he's doing a better job as president by giving you that conversation?
I think he elevated the conversation from, watching Jesse Jackson the night before call Florida an apartheid state and they're going to have race riots and all this crap, to, hey, here's the context of where people like Jesse Jackson are coming from. Here's, I felt he added a little more value to the conversation and was more thoughtful than what you hear from Melissa Harris Perry, for instance.
Sure.
It's certainly more intelligent. The president, for all the leadership flaws that we continually talk about, he is a very brilliant man. Quite intelligent, knows what he's doing. He gave the right message to a segment. You're right, Chris, of his party, of his community. I just think he's the leader of all of us, and there should be a narrative in place that applies to the country holistically, that does not single out one race over another, or that even if an unintended consequence is to be divisive, that they should be sensitive to that. But President disagrees with me. He's got the bigger microphone, so he definitely wins in that case.
Sure.
But,
well, so you felt it was relevant, Chris? You did feel it was relevant?
I felt that he added some relevancy to the discussion, that he was the first person from the, let's say, the pro-Trayvon side. Unfortunately, we're having to choose sides that I went, okay, I can see that point of view.
Sure.
He just wasn't hyperbolic. He wasn't trying to throw gas on the flames. He wasn't trying to, there was some depth.
Well, I'm going to call you out on that one, Chris, because he did say that it would have gone completely differently, or he speculated that it would have. And that's the one comment that really struck a chord with me.
Yeah, I can see the point that he threw a little gas on that one.
Or?
I can see that he threw a little gas on that particular part. So fair point. Hey Ryan, we got to wrap up, but before we go, we ought to mention Helen Thomas dying. She died this morning. Actually, she was 92 years old. So, and I'll give you the news. I got the story pulled up here. During a long career, this is from CBS News, during a long career in Washington, Thomas covered every president since Dwight Eisenhower. She worked 57 years for UPI, United Press International, where she eventually became White House bureau manager. Between 2000 and 2010, she was a columnist for Hearst newspapers. An indefatigable presence in the White House briefing room, Thomas became a pioneer for female journalists. She was one of the first female members of the Gridiron Club and the first female president of the White House Correspondents Association. As news of her death spread on Saturday, several prominent female journalists took to Twitter to hail Thomas. She was often embroiled in controversy, and generally the controversy stemmed around the Jews. Helen may have been a pioneer for women, but she was not a fan of Israel, and at one point she said they should leave America and go home to Europe and America or everywhere else. She said they should leave Israel and go home to Europe or America and everywhere else. So she was forced to resign at that moment, and she covered from Dwight Eisenhower to Bush. So I know Joe doesn't really know much about Helen Thomas, and I don't know if you do either, Ryan, but she was a pioneer figure for women, dying today at 92.
The most I know about her is that she was in the movie The American President. She asked a question to Michael Douglas, who was portraying the president, and I saw her do that. And I'm just kidding. She's always been at the forefront of many of the questions. She's been a standard or a regular face in the White House gaggle room for quite some time. It's a huge loss, because she was one of the few that, I think towards the end she was up there enough in age that she didn't really care anymore and could really ask some interesting questions. It just, yes, she had some anti-Semitic slants to her, and we cannot condone that. However, on some other topics, she really was willing to press the envelope and almost looked at it as, what are you going to do to me? I've been here forever kind of attitude. And I think in that respect, we lost someone that that really was willing to push the envelope a bit.
She really, really, really went after the Bush administration and was a constant source of frustration for Ari Fleischer, McClellan, especially in surrounding the Iraq War. At the time, I was a good little neocon, and I couldn't stand her, but now I can appreciate that someone, it just always, she was not, at the end, a reporter, she was a columnist, so she was, trying to push back with an opinion as opposed to trying to find out facts and then basing the opinion. But who can get facts from a White House briefing room? So,
well, even with Jay Carney today, I mean, can you imagine this guy at home with his wife? I mean, she walks into a room, they're about to go out, and she wants to know about the dress, and Jay, does this make my butt look big? Honey, I'm going to have to refer you to the Department of Weight and Measures for that kind of answer. I cannot answer that at this time.
Well, we can't beat that, so let's close up.
Well, that's it for this week, guys. I hope that the listeners stayed with us. I know we hit some touchy topics, and we tried to handle them in a respectful and at least proper way, and I hope we managed that. If you'd like to give us some feedback on any of the topics that we talked about today, if you want to tell us that our views are wrong or that you loved it, either way, please visit us on the We Are Libertarians Facebook page or on Twitter at We Are Libertarians. Use the Shill Report hashtag in order to get a message to us. You can also find out what we left out of this episode on the page 2 of the Shill Report that's available on wearelibertarians.com. You can also listen to us on iTunes or the Wall Radio network to hear current and past episodes. We also are played on the Indiana Talks online news station, so please do go to indianatalks.com and listen to our show along with all of the other great shows, including We Are Libertarians, that plays on indianatalks.com. And remember, folks, the media breaks the news. The Shill Report is here to fix it. Thanks, and have a great week.